Hello and welcome everyone to this new video on Jackal Productions. Today we're going to take a closer look into the different realms of Sekiro and the Soulsborne games. While exploring the unique and vast locations within these games, you've probably noticed that certain figures and enemy types are connected to specific areas, and that the placement of certain areas seems to express a deeper narratological theme. This is the very reason why we relate these different realms with two important Japanese concepts from Shintoism, namely Kang and Utaki. So, let's take a closer look into the Shinto elements within these games. When taking a closer look into the narratives and art design of Sekiro and the Soulsborne games, it is evident that these games refer to religious themes. It can even be argued that these religious themes actually overarch the complex narratives, art design and world building itself. This might suggest that the Soulsborne games and Sekiro are in essence highly religious games. In particular, the important theological concepts and art forms of Christianity have been used in order to express the various complex narratives. While the Christian concepts and artworks are explicitly part of the Soulsborne games, other religions are equally part of these works, albeit more implicit. In particular, Buddhism and Shintoism play an important role in this. And this is not very strange, knowing that the Soulsborne games are an invention of Japanese video game developers. Shintoism is highly complex and encompasses different stories and myths from different tribes from Japan. One of these tribes are the Ryoukians, who have a rather interesting conception of existence. They argue that there are two distinctive realms. The first, of humans, that is the mundane world, occupies most people's interest. The other realm, of the Kang, is poorly identified, diffuse and not clearly conceptualized. This realm is home to spirits and gods of all sorts. What is striking is that the line between the world of the humans and the world of the gods and spirits isn't clearly defined, since these spiritual entities are also able to manifest themselves in the mundane world. This is possible thanks to specific, let's say, portals or passages between these two worlds, which can be discovered and which are accessible in the world of humans. These portals are the sacred groves, Utaki, springs and caves through which the other realm may be accessed. This means that the transcendental realms are accessible on a physical level, and this is a significant difference in comparison to the Christian approach of the realm of God, which is usually supposed to be only accessible after death. The Ryoukians' way of dealing with these realms and their portals hint that there is not a clear distinction between a symbolic entry into another realm or a journey into a veritable realm. This is similar to the Tori in Shintoism, which is a gate that indicates the transition from the mundane to the spiritual or the sacred. Usually these gates can be found in front of shrines or Buddhist temples. The Soulsborne games and Sekiro have a similar approach when it comes to this blurred line between the two realms. Furthermore, in these games, players are able to find the specific portals through which they can access the realms of gods or spirits. Religious artwork plays a significant role with regards to this. Especially newly encountered in-game architecture, together with the geographical changes within the in-game world, determine this transition to a new realm. The most clear example in Dark Souls 3 is the architecture of Anor Londo. This is the city of the gods and quite fittingly resembles the Milan Cathedral and the Westminster Abbey in London. The architecture of the Archdragon Peak is clearly inspired by the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. These existing places are known for their spiritual and religious significance, which is also fitting for the Archdragon Peak area, since this location is home to the Nameless King, a god no less. In Bloodborne, the design of Murgo's Loft is largely inspired by the Notre Dame in Paris, France. Murgo's Loft leads players all the way up to Murgo, a child of a Great One, who resides on a higher plane of existence. Besides the newly encountered architecture, the geographical changes within the in-game worlds also contribute to the sense of a transition into a new realm. These realms are always connected to the dichotomy between light versus dark, in the case of the Dark Souls games, madness and beasthood in Bloodborne, and in Sekiro we can speak of the mundane and the sacred or transcendental. Take for instance Old Yharnam. This area is known for being filled with beast-type enemies, and is only accessible through secret stairs in an old temple. And what is striking is that this area is located in the lower parts of the world of Bloodborne, whereas the Great Ones and other transcendental creatures can be found in those areas that are geographically higher, apart from the Chalice dungeons. Take for instance the Upper Cathedral Ward. Here players can find the celestial emissary, an Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos. These two bosses are, in a way, transcendental beings, which fits their higher placement within the game world. This also provides a possible explanation as to why the beast-type bosses, such as the Blood-Starved Beast or Dark Beast Parl, are placed below in Old Yharnam. The placement of these monsters at specific locations seems to be an intentional choice related to the religious and philosophical conceptions of the underworld, or hell, and the heavens, etc. This relates to Mikhail Bakhtin's ideas of upward and downward, in which upward relates to the transcendental and downward to the lower parts of existence. The Soulsborne games follow this train of thought by creating distinctive worlds filled with creatures that relate to the placement of these worlds. What is interesting is that the Great Ones in Bloodborne can also be found within the distinct worlds of the Chalice dungeons, and knowing that these dungeons are lower worlds seems to debunk the idea of a literal geographical distinction between the higher and the lower worlds and beings. However, these Chalice dungeons are essentially, from a ludological standpoint, places where players can test their skill, so-called challenge runs. Furthermore, the narrative of Bloodborne implies that these dungeons are essentially the ruins of the old kingdom of Thmeru, and that the Great Ones and other celestial beings in the Chalice dungeons are essentially the original physical versions of the ones players can encounter in the real world of Bloodborne. This means that these transcendental beings have actually ascended their consciousness into a higher plane of existence, which is the world of Yharnam, whereas their physical bodies remain within the lower worlds of these dungeons. This not only casts doubt on the existence of Yharnam itself, but it also explains why these dungeons can also be regarded as part of this geographical distinction between the higher and the lower. The Dark Souls games have a similar approach. In Dark Souls 3, players are able to descend into the catacombs of Carthus, where they can find the Smoldering Lake, which is a world filled with demons and lava. This makes it literally an underworld, or hell, due to the placement of the specific enemies, together with the area's aesthetics. Moreover, the geographical placement of this area also contributes to this idea, knowing that this entire area can be found underneath the actual game world. The name itself, Smoldering Lake, is reminiscent of the biblical approach of hell, but might also refer to the well-known river Styx from Greek mythology. This river was considered as the boundary between the earth and the underworld. Another interesting example in Dark Souls 3 is the location of the Archdragon Peak. Even before finding this world, players can still see this towering location in the distance. Here players can encounter the Nameless King, which is, in terms of story, considered a god. In Sekiro, this transition from the mundane to the sacred, the spiritual, is also noticeable when thinking about changing environments and specific geographical changes. Take Fountainhead Palace for instance. In order to access this area, players first have to travel to Mibu Village. Mibu Village in itself is of spiritual significance. Think of all the apparitions, ghostly figures we encounter here. Also, the corrupted monk illusion cements the sense that supernatural forces have entered the mundane world. Once Sekiro has collected the Shelter Stone in Mibu Village, the Lotus of the Palace in the Sunken Valley, and the Aromatic Branch after defeating Al, he can be transported to the Fountainhead Palace. The Aromatic Branch itself seems to have originated from the Everblossom at the Divine Sakura Sanctuary, and this might suggest that the Divine Dragon is actually a tree. It is worth noting that both Mibu Village and the Sunken Valley have been influenced by spiritual forces through different Utaki, which are the sacred groves, springs and caves through which the other realms may be accessed. The cave in Bodhisattva Valley, where water of the Fountainhead Palace drops down, is an example of this. The Torii, or the gate through which Sekiro encounters the apparition of the corrupted monk, is another example. The most obvious is of course the enormous rope figure that transports Sekiro to the Fountainhead Palace. The rope is essentially an enormous shimenawa, a rope used for ritual purification in Shintoism. They also ward off evil spirits. These ropes can be found at shrines, sacred locations, but also in tories. While exploring the Fountainhead Palace area, players eventually are able to reach the sanctuary atop the hill. When praying here, Sekiro can enter the Divine Realm. This is a clear example of Kang, the realm of the spirits and gods. When looking at the area placement and the map of Sekiro, it becomes apparent how different areas serve this dichotomy of the underworld and the heavens. Fountainhead Palace is the highest point in Sekiro, and the Divine Realm can be accessed by reaching the sanctuary atop the hill. The depths of Ashina leading to Mibu Village function as the spiritual underworld in Sekiro. The bottomless hole is the most clear expression of this. its spiritual significance is signaled by the Tori gate. The old lady urges the player to take the jump. It's almost as if Sekiro, the wolf, is literally descending into the depths of the underworld. And after taking the plunge, players are able to explore various areas where corrupted supernatural forces are at work. It is interesting to note that Senpu Temple, Mount Kongo, is the second highest location in the game. And this makes sense from a narrative perspective, knowing that the monks at Senpu Temple try to attain a similar power and immortality as can be found at Fountainhead Palace. And as we all know, the monks actually attain a corrupted immortality. They aren't entirely able to achieve similar powers as the ones at Fountainhead Palace, meaning that even though the monks try to climb the ladder towards the divine realm, they are never able to reach it, making the area of Senpu Temple not as high as the divine realm. When thinking about Utaki and Sekiro, other locations also come to mind. These are certain caves and springs where we can find the Headless. Players have to swim or crawl towards some of these Headless, which in a way signals this sense that Sekiro is entering a domain where a kami, or spirit, resides, as if the cave or pond is a portal towards the supernatural. The clothes worn by characters and enemies in Sekiro and the Soulsborne games also support these transitions between the different worlds, meaning that the clothing also functions as signifiers. In the Soulsborne games, the garbs are, similar to the architecture, very much inspired by the Christian clothing from the medieval time period. In Dark Souls 3, enemies that relate to the otherworldly realm are the Deacons of the Deep, and the Deacons roam the grounds of the Cathedral of the Deep and Anolondo, the City of the Gods, and their clothing, clearly inspired by the clothes worn within the Catholic Church, contributes to the specific religious and spiritual realm within the game. In Sekiro, the clothing worn by the inhabitants of Fountainhead Palace is very elegant and gentle, whereas the clothing worn by the soldiers of Ashina is very mundane and simple. And this also signifies this distinction between the mundane and the otherworldly. There are probably loads of other examples of Kang and Utaki in Sekiro and the Soulsborne games, and this adds a lot to the complexity of these games. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more on this channel.